Warning: the following show contains intelligent thoughts, well-formulated ideas, and occasional pointless banter. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everyone and welcome to Hashing Out the Details. I am your host, D.L. Williams. I certainly hope you all had a great St. Patrick's Day weekend, and I hope your favorite college team got seeded high in the NCAA March Madness tournament. Today we're going to be talking on the show about a couple of different subjects. We're going to talk about the cocoa bean shortage. We're going to talk about the potential TikTok ban. We're going to touch on the upcoming return of Mike Tyson to the world of boxing at the age of 58. And all that leading into our main story today. Is the United States primary election system broken? But before we get to all that, I do encourage you to follow and subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss out on a new episode. And with that said, let's get started. Okay, so our lead-off story today is a warning of sorts that the cost of filling your kids' Easter baskets is probably going to be a bit more than previous years. It seems that most chocolate is expected to increase in price between 11 and 17% around the world. You see, a very undercovered story in the world is that for 3 consecutive years there have been historically bad cocoa bean harvests, mainly in the countries Ivory Coast and Ghana, which produce 60% of the entire world's cocoa bean supply. It's gotten so bad, in fact, that the world's largest cocoa bean processing plant, which is located in Ivory Coast, is essentially idle. Now, ordinarily, cocoa beans are handled as a commodity item with mid-level brokers purchasing directly from the farmers at pre-contracted prices, then selling to the processing plant at a slightly marked up value. The processing plants then sell the processed cocoa products like cocoa butter, cocoa powder, things like that, to your chocolate-producing companies like Hershey's, Nestle, Mondelez, who then are forced to purchase the cocoa products at not the originally expected regulated price, but at a far less regulated spot price, driving the price up dramatically. So expect to see the cost of chocolate continue to keep going up. According to some economic experts, they're saying it could take 3 to 5 years of consistent, high-quality, robust harvests in those major cocoa-producing countries to bring the supply back up to normal. Now, we're not talking about a chocolate shortage at this point in time. We're just talking about a less than expected amount of cocoa going into the system. All major chocolate-producing companies in the U.S. are reporting at this time that they have more than enough stock and expected stock. So have no fear, chocolate lovers everywhere. You can breathe a sigh of relief. There should be plenty of chocolate bars, Malamars, Milky Ways, Snickers, and peanut butter cups. Fill your heart's desires. Just the other day, in a rare show of bipartisanship, the United States House of Representatives voted on a resolution to force its parent company, ByteDance, to sell off its interest in the company, as ByteDance is a Chinese company. ByteDance is not an agency of the Chinese government directly. However, there have been major concerns about security and the divulging of statistics and user data which could be made available to the Chinese government through ByteDance and through the TikTok app algorithms. Now, currently, ByteDance has done everything it was asked to in the past. It diverted all United States user data to a Texas server, which kept it in the country. It doesn't prevent it from taking the information, again, out of the country. So there is some concern there. There is an understandable level of security concern regarding United States information. Now, nobody really can be sure what's going to happen when this bill reaches the Senate, which is far less be as heavy-handed in its approach to this situation. You see, number one, there is a great question of legality on this measure, as under the resolution, should ByteDance be unwilling or unable to divest itself of ownership of TikTok, the TikTok app would be considered a national security risk and banned by the United States government. Doing so would, for all intents and purposes, remove the ability of countless content creators on the TikTok app from what for many of them is their very livelihood, their business, and it also in many ways would eliminate their ability to communicate with society and the culture at large. Thus, the question at hand is no longer simply one of national security, but one of free speech. Civil Liberty Union lawyers are already pressing court cases in New York State and several others that they are beginning to set up the groundwork for a fight should the Senate and then the President pass this bill into law. I'm going to give my personal opinion on this one. This is not open and shut. It is not cut and dry. This is going to be an argument which I think settles along generational lines. We've seen too many cases of tech giants, cyberspace, and social media giants testifying and interviewing before government leaders. The government leaders almost universally across the board have no idea how cyberspace works, how the internet works at its most fundamental basis. This is a short clip from the tech hearings on Capitol Hill a few years back. Mark Zuckerberg testified. I believe the CEO of TikTok, I remember Jeff Bezos was there. And while I'm sure the intention was in the right place, it just demonstrated really how our demographically older and tech illiterate leadership seems to misunderstand. Give this a listen.
Well, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I have a 7-year-old granddaughter who picked up her phone and she's playing a little game, kind of game a kid would play, and up on there pops a picture of her grandfather. And I'm not going to say into the record what kind of language was used around that picture of her grandfather, but I'd ask you, how does that show up on a 7-year-old's iPhone who's playing a kid's game?
Congressman, iPhone is made by a different company, and so,
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore.
No,
I did not.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
While I understand these were indeed actually meant to be serious questions, for anyone with even so much as a working knowledge of the internet and its subsets, the very fact that these questions were seriously asked during a congressional hearing leaves me quite concerned for the future. Because these are the questions being asked by our leadership in Congress and in the Senate. In the very near future, the Supreme Court, who is even more demographically advanced, if you know what I mean. 4 of the 9 Supreme Court justices at this point in time are 69 years old or older. It's going to be very intriguing to see how this court in the future looks into, understands, and addresses these questions of the technological and digital age. Alright, fight fans, in the news that nobody was really waiting for, on July 20th, Mike Tyson will return to the ring at the age of 58 to take on Jake Paul. There is a lot of buzz about this contest, a lot of it having to do with whether it would be contested under exhibition rules or full professional fight rules. Last word I saw earlier today was that this fight would be held without headgear, which would lean it more towards a full-on professional prize fight. We've been seeing video released recently of both fighters beginning their training. Paul looks good. He has looked professionally adequate in pretty much every outing he's had. Tyson's videos have shown him looking ferocious, vicious as ever, looking like the monster we all remember from days gone by. Now, I'm no fool. The fact that Mike Tyson will be 58 on fight night is not a figment of my imagination. I have no delusions about Mike Tyson of 1987 and 1988 stepping into the ring on that night. This is a nostalgia trip, plain and simple, folks. As a matter of fact, it would seem that the promoters are in fact marketing this fight as Gen X versus the Millennials, with Tyson representing Gen X's last stand. To a generation, Mike Tyson was a monster. A monster who could destroy any man. I really believe on July 20th, there's going to be a lot of people from a particular age range, a particular generational grouping, who are going to tune into Netflix with their holding their breath and hoping against hope, hoping against time, and hoping against all logic that for just one night, one of their heroes, their gladiator, their Maximus, can draw from all of their collective willpower and force his body to do something it was never intended to do at this stage of his life. Something that all sports and athletic reason says should not be possible. That the young lion should fight off an old lion. They're going to tune into Netflix and really pray that for just one night, they can turn back the clock and see Mike Tyson step into the ring with his white towel over his head and his black trunks and no socks. And they're going to offer every droplet of spiritual and psychological willpower they can offer and pass through a TV screen, and hope that for just one night the clock can be rolled back and Mike Tyson can beat the ever-loving snot out of Jake Paul. That's what they want to see. And you know what? I hate to admit it, so do I. We'll find out what happens on July 20th. Alrighty, so we're going to take just a very short break while I catch my breath. And we'll be back with our main story as we talk about the primary election system in the United States. Is it broken? We'll be back with that in just a few moments. So that brings us to the main topic of the show this week. Over the last 3 presidential election cycles, a movement has emerged questioning whether or not the current schedule no longer allowed for the bulk of states to have any meaningful impact on the general election candidates. For our purposes here today, we're going to include caucuses in the discussion for primaries, as they are used in their states as their fundamental primary candidate selection tool. So we will include that in discussion. For those of you who haven't brushed up on how the primary system works in our country, on the whole, the way the system is set up is that there's an election held in the first half of the year, which pairs down the candidates from the 2 major parties, Democratic and Republican, to reach the 2 general election candidates who will face off this coming November. What a lot of people do not realize is that much like how the general election for president is not one person, one vote majority wins. In the general election, we lean on a system called the Electoral College, which uses specially appointed representatives to cast votes in the place of what theoretically should be the winner of that state's general election. But as most people know, most states do not constitutionally require their Electoral College designates to vote for the individual who, in fact, does win their state's general election. Much in the same vein, primaries are determined by winning delegates representative of the states in which the primary election took place. In addition to the delegates who are mandated to vote for the individual who wins the primary, every state also has a certain portion of undedicated delegates which are allowed to vote their conscience free of the result of the primary election in that state. As a matter of fact, several states, including Pennsylvania, where I'm from, their delegates are in no way, shape, or form mandated to vote for the winner of that primary, no matter what happens under any circumstances. All delegates are free to vote their conscience regardless of the result of the actual election, and in extraordinary circumstances, you would imagine that would leave them free to vote against the will of their collective people. This situation was highlighted 8 years ago when there was a bloc in the Republican Party which made every effort to convince the delegates, both locked and unlocked, to vote against Donald Trump, who had won the majority of primaries, trying to prevent him from becoming the nominee at the convention. Of course, their efforts failed, and he was in fact certified as the nominee, but it just goes to show you that the primary election system is not nearly as cut and dry as it would seem to the casual observer. So then, now that we've got the fancy book learning education stuff out of the way, we can talk about why are people starting to object to and question the scheduling of the primaries? The required number of delegates needed to lock down a nomination is approximately 1,200 for the Republican nominee, and it's closer to 1,700 or 1,800 for the Democratic. Now, in incumbent years where that party's candidate is already the sitting president, the nomination process is a mere formality unless it's an extraordinary circumstance where somebody actually runs against the standing president. That's very, very rare and almost never happens. So their delegates are generally locked down right from the get-go. However, for the party not in power, the primary elections are a major event in which the registered voters of a party select from usually a number of qualified candidates who they wish to carry the party banner in the upcoming general election. Now, where this gets a little odd is that, unlike the general election where the entire country votes on the same day, primary elections are stretched out over a span of 5 to 6 months, with those holding the earliest elections seeming to have an extremely imbalanced input into the final results and the candidate who's going to carry the party banner into the general election. A perfect example of what I'm talking about is, I'm going to go over a few of the primary dates. We have the Iowa caucuses, which kick off election season. That happens on January the 15th in this current calendar. You've got Nevada, Michigan, Washington, D.C., Alabama, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Tennessee, etc., all having elections before the end of the first week of March. For all realistic intents and purposes, the primary was settled before we even got to that point in time, the end of the first week of March. That leaves major players in the general election, major swing states, places like Arizona, Ohio, Illinois, we've got Louisiana, we've got Connecticut, we've got New York State, we have Pennsylvania, we have Wyoming, we have West Virginia, we have New Mexico and South Dakota. All of those states and a whole lot more, all major players in the general election, many of them serious swing states. And none of them will have any impact on the selection of the candidate. None of them will have any voice to say because it's already been locked down. The required number of delegates to seal the nomination has already been acquired through the earlier elections. So that brings us to the following question. Should we switch from this long drawn-out primary season of elections to a national primary election day akin to the national election day held every November nationwide? Proponents of this change believe that by holding a national primary day, candidates would then have no choice but to pitch ideas and strategies that would appeal to a greater number of states and demographics, as opposed to the current system where they only have to pitch to those holding the earliest primaries in an attempt to lock down those delegates at the earliest possible date. Opponents of the proposed change believe that condensing the primary season down to just a single election date held across the country will result in candidates having less time for explaining their platforms across the country to different audiences and different demographics, and that it will also drastically reduce the campaign fundraising season, often the bulk of which is held during the primary election campaigns as they go state to state. So then, what side of the fence do I personally come down on when it comes to this issue? I'm going to tell you, I come down on the side of the consolidated single election day strategy, but I don't come down on that side by much. I understand that in the end, most of this is really about, but that's the way we've always done. Change is hard. People hate change. People will do anything to avoid it. An old saying I once heard, which has rung true and stuck with me, and I will probably never forget it, is, the familiar is comfortable even if it's uncomfortable. Which is why you see people stay in abusive relationships. You see them staying in jobs they absolutely hate, hanging out with friends they can't stand, going to restaurants they don't like the food at. They do it because that's the way they've been doing it for a long time, and they don't want to change it because change is scary. So what do you think out there, folks? Do you think we need to change this primary system, or do you think it's okay the way it is? Well, that just about wraps up all of our time today on hashing out the details. I hope everybody had a great St. Patrick's Day. I hope you ate all the ham and cabbage or corned beef brisket you can handle. I hope you drank a green beer for me. And I hope you found a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And I hope there definitely wasn't a 3.5 foot tall, very mean-spirited leprechaun waiting for you there. This once again has been Hashing Out the Details, and your host D.L. Williams. Have a great week, everybody.